Daly, you have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Ceann Comhairle. And I have to say there is something just incredibly shallow and underwhelming about this debate. I have to say I kind of feel like groaning, actually, at the sort of shocking here we go again nature of what's in front of us. If you like, yet another inquiry, yet another investigation into questionable practices at the highest level, yet more questions raised about the undue influence of a businessman over decisions that affect the public interest and cost the public purse money. And my starting point in this really is that the fact that we have a commission of investigation isn't necessarily something that we should be patting our backs on. Minister Humphreys says the public have a right to know and this is the best way forward. Well, the government didn't think it was the best way forward when people were giving out about it a week or two ago. In actual fact, I would say that the fact that this commission is taking place is, rather than being a vindication of the greatness of the Minister for Finance, it's in fact a huge indictment on him and on his department that it has got to this stage. I note in the statement of the reasons set out in the terms of reference for the Commission that we talk about new allegations being taken into account and the perceived or potential conflict of interest that have been publicly raised. So this is why the government decided finally to give in to the idea of a commission. But I mean, presumably that means that you saw no potential conflict of interest in appointing Kieran Wallace in the first place of KPMG, despite his role originally in the sale. The reason why you're doing it now is that the conflicts of interest have been, as you say, publicly raised. But the entire public were given out about this and realised that conflict. In fact, you were the only ones who seemed to be ignoring it over the past period of time. And what is probably more shocking in some ways, apart from the incredible ignorance of the Minister's behaviour at the moment, but what is incredibly shocking apart from that is, despite all of the noise and the pressure being piled on by Deputy Catherine Murphy and others about the conflict of interest, her demands and demands from this side of the House were being relentlessly fobbed off by the government. And in actual fact, the only reason really why we're getting the commission is that your friend Dennis, probably after years of getting his own way in terms of bullying and intimidating the media into silence, decided that he'd overstep the mark and go too far, so that even ye couldn't cover up for your friendly oligarch. The rules had been broken. Dennis overstepped the mark and even ye couldn't cover up for that situation. And I have to say, I am reminded of the words of Liam Hamilton in terms of the Beef Tribunal, that if the parliamentary questions had been answered, there'd be no need for the expense of the tribunal, he said at that time. Well, here we are again. The same civil servants speak, the same culture of not answering questions, of deliberately designing answers in a manner which conceal information rather than give deputies information in this scenario. Why did it take Catherine Murphy 19 questions and a freedom of information request? Why did it take Deputy Wallace to be ignored last October when these issues were raised? Why does a culture of secrecy prevail within various government departments which seem to forget that they're there to serve the public and do their job in the interests of the public? How is it that documents are found down the back of a filing cabinet which weren't there before? I mean, this is an appalling indictment of our system. We've tribunals, investigations, inquiries, and we seem to keep coming up here. Information that has to be extracted like blood from a stone, and at the end of it, nothing changes. I mean, you know, a cynical person would begin to think that these tribunals and investigations are not actually being undertaken to effect change, but instead that they're being actually commissioned as a distraction. You know, when you think about it, most people would think that there is something incredibly tediously inevitable about the fact of question marks over the sale of SiteServe, the writing off of 119 million of a debt by a nationalised bank, something inevitable about this being bound up with Irish Water and the awarding of public contracts for the installation of water meters. And the reality is it is incredibly tedious, and obviously the ministers find it so, but that's the way business is done in this country. This is the nature of how Irish capitalism is served by those at the top. And you see, there's no necessity for anybody to have to break the law in order to pick the public's pockets. It's perfectly easy and entirely legal, and it's been going on for years. And what I think is striking about the present situation is that the holier and thou merchants on that side of the House have spent years casting Fianna Fáil off for their role in this, and you know what? You've been found out to be exactly the same as they are. How sickening that must be for you. And we've had to listen to Denis O'Brien talk about his good name over the last while, but I don't think that that's actually proven. In fact, I would say, as a result of the findings of the Moriarty Tribunal and evidence-based conclusive facts, we are in fact entitled to say otherwise. And the protestations of Denis O'Brien that his great wealth and the origins of it lie in his entrepreneurial skills and risk-taking have actually been proven to be false. They lie in the corrupt payments that were at the heart of the tribunal and the corrupt payments to Michael Lowry. And the evidence said quite clearly that the information passed on by the Minister Lowry at the time to Denis O'Brien was of significant value and assistance to him in securing the ESAT licence. And it wasn't just the amount of money, it was the elaborate deception that they went to and the lengths they went to cover it up. And what was that wealth used for? Well, that wealth went on to be the basis of an empire which bought an influence, an excessive influence in Irish media outlets, which has played a role in dictating public opinion, in characterising falsely, in my opinion, dissent and opposition in this country, and it's had a very serious effect. And to me, I think it's a bit of a mark of the brass neck of Denis O'Brien that, you know, and indeed, I would say the government's toothlessness in the area of media monopoly, that Leslie Buckley announced at the Independent News and Media AGM last week that they plan to spend another $100 million on buying up media sector acquisitions in Ireland and the UK. They're not ruling out the possibility of buying TV3. Now, to me, the announcement of this would suggest that Denis O'Brien is putting it up to the government, while, if you like, laughing behind his hands, very confident that he'll get an extension into his media influence. And why wouldn't he be confident based on everything that the government have done so far? Because you've stood over a system whereby any gains from his private speculation, if you like, were privatised and pocketed by him, and the losses are basically socialised by and paid for by the Irish public. It is a gambler's dream. Heads, they win. Tails, we lose. I mean, to be quite honest, a banana republic would be proud of it. And, you know, there has been a lot of talk from Denis O'Brien about his rights to privacy, the rights of the private citizen. I've heard Fine Gael deputies argue the point here earlier tonight. Well, let's look at the rights of the private citizen. Let's look at the rights of citizen taxpayer. Because who's paid the price of these write-downs and these special deals? It's the homeowners who can't get a write-down, the people who can't get a medical card, the people who can't get an SNA for their young person, or so on. Because, you know, we were all told to tighten our belts, but guess what? Some of us didn't have to. In fact, some of them, if you're well connected with the government establishment, not only do you not have to tighten your belt, you can actually look forward to loosening the button on your trousers, because you will be very well looked after. Now, I welcome the fact that the overzealousness of Denis O'Brien has got us to a place where we can look at the whole issue of parliamentary privilege and so on, because the reality is that this chamber has provided a useful role in assisting the public and ordinary citizens to advance issues that are important to them. Because in this era of litigation, where the powerful can use their influence and money, quite often ordinary citizens are silent. And we had the exact same scenario in the penalty points scenario. When we tried to raise issues on the Dáil floor, questions that were validly tabled were ruled out of order by the Ceann Comhairle, for example, and it was only, if you like, by putting onto the record issues that the media were then able to take that issue and run with it further. So I think it's a very valid right, but I think it's a bit rich of some people who are claiming to defend it now doing so. The last point, Ceann Comhairle, I'll make is, you know, I think there's an incredible irony about the role of the Labour Party in this situation. If the Labour Party were in opposition, the shrieks of Joan Burton and the sneers of Pat Rabbitte would be heard by Denis O'Brien at home in Malta. There's no question about that to my mind. And as for Brendan Howlin, the great defender who used to be the champion of these commissions and unravelling corruption wherever it raised its head in the past, the silence of these lambs is absolutely deafening. But you know what? It is history repeating itself, because while Dick Spring did play a very good role in terms of the Beef Tribunal early on, after the report was published, he equivocated. He didn't see it through. Why not? Because Labour were in power and they wanted to look after themselves ahead of anybody else. Well, they got their comeuppance that time, and I think they really are going to in terms of this one as well.
Thank you, Deputy.